the new Jack Richards Novices Handicap chase. Should be easy. Well, we used to have this race before, so should just be the same type, shouldn't it? We have to remember that, of course, a Plutard won that old one, didn't he? And won by had stones and stones and stones in hand. So you always try and look for that type of horse, I guess, in a Novices Handicap chase that is really well handicapped and miles ahead of their mark. But again, you don't know until you know, if you see what I mean. But sometimes the market does speak favourably. So again, I'll just mention that we will be doing a live on Sunday the 9th on the Which Bookie channel. So make sure you subscribe for that. And then these handicaps, once we're much closer to the event, we will have probably much more conviction in there. But I'd say in this race, Will, they could get split up between this and the plate. That's happened in the past as well when you used to have the Close Brothers Novices chase on the Tuesday, because they're a similar trip. But those switches used to happen because it was the new course versus the old course. Both being on the new course, I'd imagine, unless they don't get in, that most of the novices would probably go in the novice race, unless Connections is suspected that the plate would be the easier target. But I mean, you can't say that for any race at Cheltenham. You can't cherry pick any of them, I don't suppose. But Jaguar probably wasn't supposed to win according to the market last time, but did win. Head in the market, another JP horse that's quite short. He's interesting, but I don't know how much more he's probably got in hand. Firefox was one that was on my radar for this race, because when they started at the beginning of the season over the middle trip, I thought, what are you doing? This potentially should be an Arkle horse. And then when they dropped him back in trip the first time, I thought, well, it wasn't a bad run because they've been racing the middle trip, and maybe next time at 2 miles he'll show that 2 mile class again. And then he didn't do it the next time after. So now I think, all right, well, you've made him a 2.5 miler. Let's stand him in that sort of stead. And I think if the ground came up goodish, he's the type of horse that could just be quicker and better than some of these in the finish. But he's very defensively priced. I think he's a top price 10-1 for this race at the time of recording. So we're doing this on the 21st. The one that I did think was worth a bit of a mention, but takes a little bit of convincing, I guess, is Peaky Boy, that was absolutely slammed in that Reynoldstown at the weekend. Because part of the reason why I fancied the Changer Man so much in there was I didn't think the Peaky Boy really wants the 3 mile trip. That was his first run for the new yard after leaving Nicky Henderson. So, with no disrespect to the yard, it is a downgrade in that first instance from where he'd been running before to where he's been going after. But I think his couple of runs at this course and distance earlier in the season are fairly good, and there's enough in there to suggest that he probably is still well handicapped. And I remember a couple of years ago when Sky Pirate was sold mid-season at a sale as well. They picked him up in the sales, kept him in the same yard, didn't change that time round. But they went and won a Grand Annual with him the same season by doing something different and changing the trip. He'd been running at 3 miles the whole time. That one's slightly different, though, because it was John Joe O'Neill running him at 3 miles, and then John Joe O'Neill dropped him back to 2 miles. So that probably says as much as you want to know about him. But in this instance, I think he's not without a chance. Admittedly, he's got to do a lot better than he did last time in the Reynoldstown, but he's about a 25-1 shot, non-runner money back. I'd imagine if they think they've got a handicap in him, they'd enter it. Well, if they've entered him, they'd run him in here if he's got a chance, rather than running him in here to hide him, if you see what I mean, because he has got good form at Cheltenham. So if they didn't run him, I think, doesn't mean he's a bad horse. I think they're just saving him for another day. If they did declare him, I would be interested in him. I think he could be a bit of a fly in the ointment, but it's reaching to say that Peaky Boy, after his performance, has got a chance in this race. It looks like it's going to be a pretty deep one, Will. Did you manage to make a short list or a long short list?
A long short list, yeah. In regards to Peaky Boy, I mean, that run at Ascot was a third run over fences to qualify for this race. So, you know, the stable have only just acquired him. You know, nice quiet run just to blow a few cobwebs away. I wouldn't look into the performance too much from that particular race. I mean, when a horse goes to the sales, change of routine, etc., you know, if this is a fairly short-term plan, admittedly, then it's one that they've got, you know, a chance to potentially have a go at. Jaguar, he looks good. He'll be, I imagine, you know, he probably wasn't 100% the other day when he won. I think his raw ability carried him through on that occasion, and he won, you know, very, very easily. Handicap probably could have gone a bit more overboard, actually. Hasn't been too unkind, I must admit. And he's the obvious one, isn't he? But sometimes the obvious ones aren't the ones to go with in this particular instance. Plenty of those at bigger prices that make some kind of appeal. And I think there'll probably be bigger prices on the day and more places as well. So I wouldn't maybe suggest going in with them now. But I mentioned one horse in respect to the Arkle on the day one preview for Joseph O'Brien, which is Jordan's. He's probably more likely to turn up here He's had the requisite number of runs to get into the race. He ran a cracker, I thought, in the Grade 1 at Limerick at Christmas time behind Ampere Pass, when he sort of just sidled through the race in the rear and then showed a nice turn of foot late on, actually, to run down Search for Glory for second. I think generally that was a pretty strong piece of form. I know Ampere Pass was beaten at the DRF, but he was beaten by a very good horse, and he's never really been as good at Leopardstown, I don't think, that horse Ampere Pass anyway. So, that's Grade 1 form. Much will depend on what the handicapper does with him. You'd imagine the mark will be probably mid-140s, but, that'll be fine. This will be a classier renewal than it has done previously because it's open-ended at the top. So I bet we'll find plenty of these types of horses running in it, and we'll find the record of winners will probably be those classier types as we go through the years with it. Beyond that, Jordan's and there was one other one actually to make a mention of, but again, probably bigger price on the day, probably extra places. The Company Sergeant for Gavin Cromwell. He's not had the horse long. He's only had one run for him, which came in a handicap hurdle back at Navan, I think it was, about a month or so ago. If you look at some of this horse's form in graded races when trained by Dennis Hogan, very, very strong form behind the likes of Spillans Tower in Grade 1s, Ashdale Bob, decent races. Again, handicapper will have a hand to play, but it was extremely well backed for that debut for Gavin Cromwell over hurdles. He ran maybe just as if fitness was race fitness was a bit of an issue late on. But he's definitely a horse to keep half an eye on because he's the type that Gavin Cromwell will squeeze some more out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just pulled up on the Racing Post now because I'd had him on my notes to mention, and you've done the deal there. Well, I was going back for his form as well because he's behind Ashdale Bob and things like that, and then I saw he was behind that Mr. Policeman. I was like, we won't mention that one. But yeah, but the switch of yards, and Gavin Cromwell as well has been in very good form this season. He's had a real good Christmas, didn't he? I don't think he's an underrated trainer because people know how good he is, but he's been targeting more and more at these big meetings. He's getting a bit of ammunition for it, and I think he's found a bit of a system with some of these horses that come in to know which sort of paths or routes to go. So yeah, he's been like the subject of some interest on the exchange as well for both this and the plate. I think he's got a Coral Cup entry too, but you'd imagine they must be going back over fences with him.